Several years ago, a cardiology office in New Mexico made the decision to upgrade their paper medical records and replace them with an electronic medical record, EMR. This decision would inevitably necessitate abstracting tens of thousands of paper records and re-entering the data into the new database. Because the scope of the project was so broad, the practice assigned a full-time project manager to the job. The EMR vendor also assigned a project manager. Unfortunately, the project was delivered late and over budget. When a project goes off the rails in budget and time, dependencies and contingencies are often the culprit. A dependency refers to a task that cannot be completed unless another task is started, in progress, or completed. Contingencies are the resources assigned to a project that are not earmarked for any particular task. Instead, the resources, usually financial, are held in reserve in order to keep a project on track, even if some dependencies become unaligned and threaten the delivery date of the project. In the cardiology group's EMR conversion, significant dependencies included the following. Abstracting, transferring data from the paper records, cannot commence until the installation of the database that will hold the new electronic health records. Therefore, the project task, abstraction of records, is dependent on the task, install the database. Installing the database cannot commence until the appropriate computer hardware has been configured. As a result, the project task, install the database, is dependent on the project task, configure the hardware. Destroying the old paper records cannot commence until the abstraction of records has been started. These project tasks will run simultaneously. Testing any features of the EMR will require that the configuration of the system be in progress. The two most common types of dependencies are predecessors and successors. A predecessor is a task that must be completed before the next step can start. Likewise, a successor is a task that begins after the task before it has been completed. Using the bullet list for reference, the fact that the chart abstraction cannot start until the database is installed means that installing the database is a predecessor to the chart abstraction task. In the last bullet, configuring and testing features is happening simultaneously. Going live with the software would be a successor to the project task of final testing. In the cardiology group's EMR conversion, a few key contingencies included resources held in reserve to mitigate the risk that additional temporary workers would be required in order to meet the go-live date. Resources held in reserve to mitigate the risk that the EMR could become unusable and the practice would have to urgently switch back to using paper records in order to keep the business running. The nature and amount of resources to be reserved should never be based on guesses or arbitrary factors. One popular method for calculating a contingency is the Monte Carlo method, an algorithm applied to numerous, random, and independent samples. For the EMR conversion case study, the Monte Carlo method to calculate risk would mean sampling numerous offices in the conversion process in order to determine how likely and how costly it would be if the abstraction process fell behind schedule and had to be remedied. If a contingency is utilized, determining the cause is critical. By nature, tapping into the contingency means that the project deviated significantly from its intended course. Determining the reason for the contingency helps a project manager provide a better and more accurate project plan. In the case study, if the physician's office required the use of additional resources to meet the conversion deadline, the project manager can use the information to create a project plan with a decreased chance of overrun. All projects have dependencies and contingencies. Dependencies are project tasks that cannot be completed until other tasks have reached a certain stage or have been completed. Predecessors are tasks upon which future tasks rest, and successors are tasks that come immediately following the task before it. Contingencies are resources that are either held in reserve or added to base contract cost in order to address unforeseen problems that threaten to derail the project. Contingencies can be used to allocate additional resources to tasks that are lagging, but it is important to understand the reasons for the need to use the contingencies so that future project plans can be adjusted accordingly.